All right, welcome to X Garage.
X Garage, where what's the
Diving into the crazy world of worldviews with the Christian worldview?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting too easy now. We're gonna have to throw in some, a couple extra prepositions and some nouns and some adjectives and some more adjectives.
Spice it up. Make sure that we're more specific. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta really specify things nowadays with what our topic is. Jake the Snake's not here.
Yeah, so we're kind of leaderless. I mean, he's kind of the arbiter of our channel in a way. Like, he kind of keeps us in our lines and keeps us going. So Heath and I will kind of be sharing that today and going over Antifa. Yeah. Do you know what that stands for, Heath? I bring it up.
I do, and actually I have an etymology thing here, quite
sweet.
Detailed. We'll put up probably on our website or somewhere. But with that said, I just realized I don't have my my plugs in. Can you hear me just fine?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. You're not echoing or anything like that, so it's good.
Great. Okay, so did you do some etymology on this name?
I didn't do much, but I mean, I looked at
there's
how. Yeah, there's not much to it. I mean, I know that there's it's very much they're anti-fascist, and that's very much embodied in their name.
Okay, yeah, I got excited as soon as I realized some of it. Anti. You got the Greek, right, preposition.
Yeah.
And there's a Latin preposition as well with it, but I think it's from the Greek. It's one site has it. It seemed actually a little more well done, straight from the German. Another one had a little bit of the Italian with the second half, so fascism
okay.
I think it's fascio. I don't know Italian, but yeah. So you got anti and then fascism is basically it. But it's against this whole idea of a hierarchical structure, dictatorship that's basically has the control piece on the national. Okay. We're gonna preface something. We're not have political science majors. Is that the
yeah we're not political really. We're both theology majors, or we study the Bible. We study theology. Really, this is no way part of our expertise. So we're approaching this simply from a biblical, theological perspective, viewing this ideology purely from that perspective.
Yeah. So what I'm noting, as we talk, we're going to, and as you see, I got a sunburn. I can't help but see it every time I look at myself. I just caught a little shade of
it. Really doesn't look that bad. Like it's coming through as like a nice tan. Like
4th of July, I was out and got a little bit of a burn. So I always assume, because my family background's Hawaiian and half of my family's Hawaiian Chinese and the other side's all European, that I will somehow never get burned, and I always get burned. It doesn't work for me. Anyhow, with that said, I was going back to the name here. So fascism, the idea is this dictatorship, but it's not just dictatorship, it's nationalistic or racial-based dictatorship, they claim, is what they're really against. Any ideas that would bring about a structure where everyone is controlled by a certain belief and ideology that is hierarchical. You got those at the top, others at the bottom, being suppressed, and doing so with a belief of nationalism or racism, which sometimes can be tied together and oftentimes is, That's the idea of fascism.
Yeah.
I think groups like probably that are those, people would spot out would be like Adolf Hitler in Germany or something.
Yeah.
Or
people would, yeah.
Mussolini was actually probably with the roots of this actually fascism coming out of Europe, was Mussolini and their response against him. I think, right? Is it? I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a European sort of origination, with specifically focusing in on Adolf Hitler's reign and Mussolini, and just sort of the whole ideology of a supreme race. That's why they're often very, very anti. What is it? White supremacists.
Yeah.
White supremacy, and in fact, I think I was reading something on them. They started in the 1960s, so pretty shortly after World War II, and they didn't even make it to America until the 1970s. So this group isn't actually that old.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. The thing is, it kind of started in more of that pop culture, street culture against the white supremacy that was coming into the punk rock movement and all these other movements in America. It didn't become what it is and we see today in the current stream, where it's actually, it seems to, I might be jumping the gun here on like just, before we critique, let's, I was going there.
No, I was going to go there too.
And another preface is that there's not much on the internet, obviously, that is really descriptive of the group. Like, again, because they like to have things a little bit covert. Not that a little bit, but everything covert. They like to have that. But as much as they have been in the eye of any event, people have drawn out information about them and some comments here and there about their group and organization going back from where it started over in Europe, etc. So there's things that we know, and then there's a lot that is just left undone because they aren't explicit about their beliefs, their fundamental philosophy. But we do have general stuff. And the one thing I was going to say about the pop, kind of, they see if I can find it here.
Just to interject here, so we just got a comment from Devin Fox saying, didn't Karl Marx say that when you're in a communist nation, the government becomes what the people worship? That would be awful, LOL. And I mean, I would agree with that.
That's a really good assessment. Do you say the government becomes what the people worship?
Yeah, in a communist nation. And I mean, and you can see that. And so in a way, that's why we're kind of taking up this idea of Antifa, especially since it's so much in the public eye right now. And their goal is to bring about cultural Marxism with the ultimate goal of taking over the government into a communist ideals, or convert the government into communist ideals. Yeah.
And like we were talking about before, some of them wouldn't identify with communism. There are those within this, they call it, we're going to have to get there. This is, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, it's going to be fun. Yeah.
It's not an organized group. I think we're going to have to beg to differ on that. But there are differences within the group. One thing is that some claim more of a socialistic standing, which, as we were talking about, really is a moderate form that is ultimately, if you're going to be consistent, you're going to go to communism. I don't know all the nuances, but I'm almost certain, without being a major on this topic, that is the position. Communism, that would ultimately, is where it all goes. And I think you had mentioned something of that. But the thing is, so it starts off in America with this kind of this real. It wasn't really that deeply involved in all of the major political structures, but it was really a focus on, again, that street pop level white supremacy movements against white supremacy, And then today's Antifa, as we've seen in the last 5 to maybe 10 years, I don't know. Again, this is not our topic. I'm going to keep saying that throughout because this just isn't. And we didn't, yes, we've done a lot of peripheral studies. But today's Antifa has widened their cause of their what they would call direct action, or their indirect and direct action, where they will do anything to get their point across. They've widened it from just this whole white supremacy ideas to actually, it seems to be just right-wing ideas in general, such as, like American values. If you hold American values, such as the Constitution, you're almost then identified as, if you go into a secular or just a state university and go in there to talk about the Constitution, upholding it, you're going to probably find, I wouldn't be surprised to find some Antifa groups out there trying to shut down your speech. Upholding traditional family unit, because they see that as suppressing other values. So pro-life or etc. So it's not just about this idea of things that were identified with fascism, but now they're just getting into every area of just moral thinking has to be in line with their thinking. Otherwise, again, if you're not worshiping that thinking, you need to be essentially shut down. That's what I'm gathering from it. They've kind of blurred the lines between what is far right or extreme right, as it's said within political, the pendulum there. And they've qualified everything, pretty much a lot of things, as far right ideas, and then to the extreme that you're qualifying honoring the Constitution with nationalism, racism, fascism, and white supremacy. Anyway,
and in a way, you'd almost have to say, well, let's follow the money and see why they've changed that, and like maybe it is. It's
that's good.
Maybe going back to that in some way they see the Democratic Party as the best way to complete their goals, which is kind of strange, because if you look at the ideals of fascism, with eradicating races and killing the weak of a society, those are things that actually the Democratic Party seem to be more upholding, giving their ideas on assisted suicide, their ideas on abortion. And this is like one of the main inconsistencies that you can continually see pointed out on the internet concerning these, I guess you could call them neo-Marxist movements, or cultural Marxism, which is basically what this Antifa is striving for. Once again, we have Devin Fox saying, "Wow, I wonder if that's why Christians are being condemned in China." And that's absolutely right. The main thing concern with communism is that the people will not be worshiping the government as the arbiter of truth and justice and all these different things.
And it really does if we're going to talk about their metaphysics and their philosophy, and I don't know everything about this group. Please, I want this group to write their own systematic theology. You could start off with, we don't know if there's a God. That's still part of theology. Okay. So write it out for everyone. But the idea that for them, they want this communal structure. And yet what we just noted with China running off of this idea, it's not communal by any sense. It's really a limitation, and the only people that have the freedom, and it's not even a true freedom, because you can't even think against the ideals of the day. If you do, you're shut down. So so it's really actually it's the antithesis of which it claims to be. If you want a more communal society, you should have what, again, we have in the Constitution, the amendments of things like freedom of speech, freedom of the press. You don't have that going on in communist socialist structures.
No, and it's because the hierarchy is incredibly strong, actually, within that system. You have the rich are actually extremely rich, and then there's just the general public. You have those who are in leadership, who strive for leadership, who scratch the right backs, and they end up on the top, and then those on the bottom. And the problem is it's a test. It's a system that's been tested again and again throughout history, and it continually fails. And it's just one of those ironic things that they just keep beating that dead horse. But the thing is it's once again, it's right here. Maybe I'm going to critique again, but
we're there. We'll go back and forth.
Yeah, is they keep falling into this idea of that humans are inherently good, not inherently, inherently good, and the problem with that is that the reason for government is to suppress evil. That's the reason God put it into place. And if you create a form of government that does not suppress evil, then you've created a form of government that is not realistic to human nature, which is inherently evil, and will tend towards evil things.
Yeah, that's really
good. And so you end up with this system of government that just it's not going to work.
And I think that's why all governments, no matter where you're at, there has to be they have to be subject to a law themselves, i.e., God's law. There's no law apart from God. If God doesn't exist, there is no law. It's all arbitrary, right? We're even saying that. As soon as you have a government ruling the law of the land, it becomes arbitrary to how they feel as a small group of people and what they want to dispense to the rest. And to what extent people can even speak into that, I don't even know at that point. Once you've established a government in that way, like you said, time and time and again, it doesn't prove to be fruitful. But they ultimately, we have to be subject to laws that are abiding over all of us. We as Christians, we understand that that's because God created us in his image. He created the world a certain way. And as image bearers in general, even those who are not saved or have come to faith in Christ, which he calls us all to, and that's where the gospel is universal. People forget that. Jesus called all to himself.
Yeah.
And he calls all to repent and come under his ruleship, which is good. But he's God. He's the lawgiver. He's the one who spoke forth the world. John 1 through 14, Colossians 1, Hebrews 1. But when you have a fallen men or women in seats of power like that, dictating law, you're going to have groups suppressed. You're going to have thoughts suppressed. You're going to have race suppressed. You're going to have all these things will come up because there's no standard by which to keep them accountable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's no checks and balances. There's no, there's just nothing holding anyone down. I mean, there needs to be some sort of line of authority, check and balances, if you're going to make a government work properly within the sinful human nature concept.
And that's important. The fallenness of humanity, that's clear, which again confirms the Christian worldview and our need for Jesus. We live in a fallen world. And I think that's something that these worldviews don't understand. A lot of times they're not, they don't, a lot of the philosophers behind these systems that a lot of people are buying into, they're working from the fallenness of man. They're really working from probably more of like the clean slate idea or something else that makes it as though humanity is starting to arrive at a deeper humanity, and thus humans have this ability to bring about the greatest condition that we can. And so it's this idea that we're no longer looking to God, we're just looking to ourselves as we progress. It's just an I relationship. There's no I thou, I God. It's just us, and we are the ultimate truth. And so they're not even working from a framework that would understand their own intentions, really. I'm talking again about the philosophies that are built. They don't have a place for understanding the intention of the human heart that is fully wicked in other words, and by that, a lot of people are like, what does that mean? By that, I mean we've rejected God's authority.
Yeah.
We have our own authority now in our minds, and
Mm-hmm.
we live our lives by that authority. We will only take laws that are over us so long as we desire to receive it. Otherwise, we'll reject it. In other words, we are taking the seat of God.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, we're worshiping ourselves. We're setting up governments that is placing humanity in the seat of divinity. Anyway, I feel like I'm going on because I'm not articulating the hard thing, but I think we get it somewhat across.
Yeah, I know, and I think that what you're saying is perfect. So, once again, Devin is touching on another interesting subject. He seems to be the one who's commenting on our stuff. So, thank you, Devin. He says, "What is crazy to me about a lot of higher level Democrats identifying as Christian/Catholic, yet back abortion among a lot of other things. Not to say they are fake followers. It's strange to me. Not to say that they're
That's good.
Not to say that they're fake followers. So
it's a good distinction.
This is something that we really need to address. Is even me, like some of my friends from the college days, like I went to Moody with, I went to theology classes with, some people I grew up with on the mission field. A lot of these people are totally buying into these ideas. I'm sorry to lump it all together, but unfortunately, a lot of them are born out of the same ideas. Ultimately, a lot of these are, obviously they're all born out of our sinful nature. The fact that we are sinful and that the world is trying to get us to sin, and that we have these spiritual assault on our flesh as well, causing us to sin.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I interject there?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think too. And this is I say this as more of a template, maybe, or an analogy, but I do think in many ways a lot of what we've seen in Christianity over the last, say, 100 years or so, is that we've grown up in a culture that is so engulfed in a lot of world unbiblical understanding of life, philosophies and systems that have gotten into education, and it's really infiltrated many areas of our life, and big time with media, movies, and etc. Where Christians are actually the time of the judges type thing, where there are, I think, believers who have, like is mentioned by Devin, is they've bought into ideas that are not distinctly Christian, unwittingly, and again, whether it's a sin of omission or commission, it's sin, and it affects our lives, but we're not aware of that. The fact that we're saying we're Christian, yet we're holding a view that is not Christian, and we see that throughout the judges. We see these, everyone does what is right in their own eyes. Even the people of God at the time were not upholding Torah. They were not upholding the law. They were not, and that was the story of it. That's why we need Jesus and grace. But the whole point is it was worse, that the quality of life and the obedience was worse. And in a good, faithful believer at that time was not really, or not faithful, but faithful in the sense of they were seeking the honor of the Lord, but were not perfect. A lot of that we have to think about in the context of the depravity, the condition of the time. And so I think it still doesn't, God raises up great men and women to serve him in the midst of the most depraved conditions of society, like Noah. But I would even say Noah was obviously not perfect, but by grace he was counted righteous in his generation. But the idea then is still, there's no excuses, but we still got to understand our context. We're raised and born in a really distorted generation. Yeah,
reality. And something I've just been thinking about, especially today, is the idea of I guess you could say the experiment of America is this idea of a lot of persecution going on over in Europe at the time of especially the Pilgrims coming over. The Pilgrims coming over, they were Reformed people from England who were living in the Netherlands, because of the freedom of religion in the Netherlands, but they didn't like the cultural appropriation that was going on in the Netherlands, and so they end up moving to the United States to found this idea of religious freedom. And I feel like we are just now in America seeing the death of that, slow death of that religious freedom, through this idea of Marxism, and all these ideas of Marxism, which are all sort of based in Darwinianism, which a lot of them are birthed out of that idea, where we've supplanted God, or supplanted religion, with another religion, basically a religion that is completely centered around man, and that we can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and achieve this idea of utopia, which of course also echoes back to, I don't know if you ever read Utopia.
No.
I remember. Yeah, it was a book written, I think, way back. It's 1500s. I'd have to look it up. It's an old book. I read it. It's not very long, but it actually means no place, and it's basically this idea of creating a place where everything actually works. And America wasn't founded on that. America was literally founded on this fact of people just wanting to get away from religious persecution. And now we have this idea of now what do we do as Christians, as we are getting encroached on by social pressures. And there's two things that we can do. We can give in to those social pressures, or we can resist them. And if we resist them, ultimately we're going to be hated, and we're going to have that issue. But if we give into these social pressures of our culture, things are going to be easier for us. But we're going to have to give up some fundamental beliefs of Christianity, including our views on feminism, our views on the sanctity of life, even base ideas of God's sovereignty in creation, of how he created the world, and all these different things, or even just the state of man as just a whole, like our state of man before God and the necessity for a savior.
Yeah.
Maybe
no,
that's good.
I'm going back, and I just slipped my mind. What would you, just to get my mind back on that, because I wanted to touch back on that with a thought. How would you summarize that? Basically, Christians losing a lot of. I think essentially you end up losing Christ. You end up losing Christianity. Christ has commanded it. Yeah. And the thing is I've written quite extensively for certain reasons on the topic of how Christians respond in the midst of, and many have throughout the centuries. So a lot of the positions I hold, there's just like about 3 or 4 on how Christians go about this. And I guess, and again, how you go about something, there's multiple ways you can do that and still be within the Christian and biblical worldview, how you go about responding to government. Because there's various Christian beliefs that really respond to how to go about our place with relation to the world in different ways. Oh, yeah. And I think Christians can respond. I just want to give this as a kind of maybe a practical help, and a biblical. It's grounded in Scripture. One is pray. And that would be more the pacifists will tend to just pray for the world. And that's the Quakers and some groups, where they're not going to go out and get engaged deeply into politics. Maybe they. I don't know where they're at currently. Historically, I don't believe that's the move. But then there's Christians that are will then use the laws within which they are being governed by to speak out, whether it's verbally. So one thing we can do is to uphold these values and to share them, because they are actually values. I think if we communicate them well, a lot of those who are following Adam can respond to them in their conscience and understand, yeah, that seems a little more logical and right, you know. So it doesn't mean they're going to become Christian, but they're going to see that yeah, okay, that we're created with equal dignity and honor. Human. That's distinctly Christian. Distinctly biblical Christian worldview, Genesis 1 through Revelation 22. And so these values, I think if we communicate them well in our culture, that too can honestly be, I think that's the most powerful thing, is when we can confront others with biblical truth in a meaningful way that shows we care for them, care about their salvation, care about truth. And then there's the extent to which this is like that third step. So you got prayer, you've got communicating with other image bearers the truth of God's word, which God's Spirit uses to change hearts, and he also uses it to actually just give grace to the unbelieving world to understand and just get the benefits, and there's no salvation there, which is sad, but
no, it is,
grace. But then there's a step of being activists in the sense of more that revolutionary effect, which we see more with guys like who's that with Germany and with Hitler, and the book, the autobiography written recently on Bonhoeffer. Yeah. So there's been some Christian positions getting more politically involved, and I think when you have, and for this position, it's when you have an entire nation following an unruly emperor, and you have a group of image bearers agreeing that this is an unjust rule, then you're not acting solely in retaliation, but you're acting justly as a form of government bringing judgment on another on a unjust ruler. And in that sense, it's been many and would argue that's a justified way of bringing about change, is to overthrow something like. But again, that was done on a national level. That was just a little group. It was just everyone understood what was going on in Germany was absolutely against human dignity and value in life and all that is good and precious.
Yeah.
So all that to say, that's just three quick ones, but there are just many ways to navigate it and how we should. I think we can respond. I think we're with what's going on with in our culture, I think we do need to just be really clear in our values and communicate them. I don't know. I'm going on and on. Maybe we've gone off on a tangent.
I know. No, but I think it's a good tangent, because it really does speak into what is going on right now with the Antifa movement, the emergence of neo-Marxism, the violent revolts. We got another comment from Devin Fox, who, if you want to read it, you can go ahead, if you can see it. No,
you got it. You're leading that.
Okay. He says, that's awesome. Dr. Turek says something very similar. Without death or the fallen world, we don't need Christ to save us. This gives me a lot of comfort when thinking about how broken the world is right now. And and for a Christian, it does bring us a lot of comfort, because we understand that this thing called sin, eventually it rises up and it corrupts. And us as a church, we should have been rising up before that, but it's our moment to rise up as well and continue to be the salt of the earth. And it's interesting. I've talked a lot about government and the churches, or thought about and read a lot about government and the church's reaction to government in a lot of things as well. So Heath, you and me, I guess we have a common search for trying to figure out how to react to those things. And really, like, there are so few commandments in the Bible specifically concerning these things. I mean, there's quite a few, but like there's very specifics, like taxes for one thing. Like, we continue to pay taxes. I feel like no matter what. that shouldn't be something that we stop.
Right.
I mean, you look at the government that Jesus was talking to at his time when he said, "Well, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's." It was a government that was quite corrupt, quite pagan. I mean, it was actually very, very much government worship at that point. I mean, as the emperor was the god of that society. And obviously, you mentioned praying for our government.
Mm-hmm.
That's another commandment. And then a lot of people point to Daniel, which I think is actually a very interesting study
Mm-hmm.
for our reaction to government. But looking at Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those are some great ones. There is a point where they stop following mandates of the government. In Daniel's case, it's when he continues to pray despite the national mandate to not pray. And with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it's not bowing down to this representation of the Babylonian government at that time. And I think that's important for Christians because I think that's probably the best picture we have as Christians living in a world not of our own. Like we the Bible talks pretty explicitly that we're not citizens of this world. Ultimately, we're citizens of heaven once we are in Christ. But we still exist in this world, and we still enjoy the structure that government brings to suppress sin. And when a government ceases to do that, then we get those points of contention,
Right.
like Bonhoeffer,
And
like you were
that's
saying.
an important distinction. I like this. I'm not. Well, this is fun. This is for the theologians out there. I'm not dispensational per se, but I do like this. What the dispensationalists have emphasized in after the Noahic period is the establishment of governance. That God actually is the one who established governance during this fallen state of humanity. So when we see even emperors ruling a people, and they're not saved emperors, they're actually they're even established to bring about civil society such that it's not just bringing us into the qualitative extent of sin that would be unbridled to the extent that no one could survive. That's essentially where we would go if God's grace wasn't at work through judicial purposes and through our hearts and sustaining our knowledge, our minds, however one wants to go about it anthropologically. It's all God's grace working in mercy. Mercy might be the better word. And so when we look at human governance, period, at this point, is because of the fall. It's not just some strange thing we started. And you see that in, I believe, Genesis 9. I haven't 9 or 11 or through 11. I can't remember or quote perfectly at the moment. But all that to say, just a reminder there for viewers and for us is just to be encouraged that even when you live in a society with laws, like you're saying, we should submit to them, pay your taxes, do these things. Good. These are for God. God established for just purposes. Romans 13. Is it 13? Correct? Not 14, right? 13.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And yet there are moments where governance goes to the extreme to where it then commands things like you just mentioned, Ethan, that are completely unbiblical, like worship the emperor for an extreme way, deny Christ. At that point, you just keep worshiping the Lord. And you're right. I think Daniel is such a great example of that blend, where you see it open up in the first few chapter of Daniel, where he actually knows their literature, he knows their worldview, he could teach it, and he was teaching it.
Yeah,
and we should be out there as Christians, knowing the worldviews of the day, such that we could teach it, such that we don't even allow our presuppositions to misinterpret their literature, which is going back to Antifa. I think. Maybe we can touch back on some points here. I think there's a lot of these groups that are misinterpreting other groups just to buy their narrative. Daniel doesn't do that. Daniel is a firm worshiper of the Lord, the true God, and he knows their stuff. He can teach it. They enjoy him. God graces him by that. And then yet he still won't bow down and break God's law.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a way to be Christian in a fallen world that supports the world, and and if God wills us to endure some persecution of some sort, we do it faithfully.
Yeah, exactly.
But I want to touch on that real fast. Can I switch this topic?
Oh, absolutely. Should we just end our session, or we can just start another one? We could go ahead and do that. Yeah. Right. So thank you for listening to this episode of X Garage. We're gonna go on to our next subject.
And thanks, Devin, for these comments.
Oh, awesome!
Hope you haven't left yet, because these have been so good. Yeah, X Garage.
X Garage.
We'll be right back.